The sponsor for today's podcast is Sita Eco Mission. Eco Mission is a tool that simplifies compliance, cuts cost, and offers real-time insights to support sustainable operation at airlines. Sita Eco Mission helps airlines handle regulations like Refuel EU, CORSIA, and EU ETS, making compliance easier while supporting better, greener choices. Learn more in the link in the show notes.
You know what really makes me afraid? It's to live in a world that burns 1 million tons of oil every hour. This frightens me. What frightens me is to have a world of pollution, inefficiency, waste of natural resources, waste of energy, social inequalities, poverty, biodiversity issues. Well, this frightens me. But to fly in a solar-powered airplane, to fly in a hydrogen airplane, no, this is for me a dream. It's not a fear.
Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. I'm your host, Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simply Flying. Every Thursday, I have important conversations with top aviation executives, technology entrepreneurs, and policymakers helping aviation take climate action. Conversations that help separate the signal from the noise. Whether you are a frequent flyer or an airline executive, if you care about sustainability or simply love traveling, welcome aboard. My guest today is Bertrand Piccard. Bertrand is a Swiss explorer, psychiatrist, and an environmentalist. He was the first person to complete a non-stop balloon flight around the globe in a balloon called Breitling Orbiter 3. He then led the world's first round-the-world solar-powered flight. And now he is planning in 2028 to operate the world's first hydrogen-powered round-the-world flight. Bertrand and I speak about his adventures, why it is so important to think like an explorer in everyday life, and what he intends to achieve with this hydrogen flight. I hope you enjoy this interview. Bertrand, it is a pleasure to be finally speaking with you. You come from a family of explorers and innovators. Has this legacy influenced your passion for pushing the boundaries in aviation? And what inspired you to do a sustainable flight?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I come from a family where nothing was impossible, where I could meet astronauts, test pilots, explorers, divers, environmentalists, mountaineers. So I had a vision of life where it's always interesting to explore, to go for the unknown. And of course, there was the stories of my grandfather and my father. You know, my grandfather accomplished in 1931 the first flight ever into the stratosphere. And for this, he built a pressurized cabin. That was the first time ever. And nobody wanted to help him because they thought that he was going to die. So finally, it's a Belgium company, Solvay, and the King of Belgium, Albert I, who sponsored him. And what was the goal? You know, not an altitude record. The goal was to show that if you fly at very high altitude in thinner air, you will consume less fuel because there will be less resistance. So for my grandfather, it was already a question of energy efficiency.
Wow.
Of using the resources correctly and to be ecologist already at the time. And in 1942, he already wrote an article about solar energy to say that we had to get rid of fossil fuels and go for renewable energies. So I was in this spirit in my entire childhood. So it was normal that with the solutions of today, I would try to continue this work and go around the world in a solar-powered airplane, and soon, I hope, successfully in a hydrogen-powered airplane.
let's work backwards on this, right? Let's start with your balloon flight. You did that a while ago. What inspired, that successful balloon flight? Also, the round the world solar power flight. What did you learn?
Well, the balloon flight around the world, the Breitling Orbiter 3, that was my personal dream. I had the opportunity to launch a project, to lead a project, and to fly in a balloon around the world nonstop. That was a piece of the history of aviation at the time, It was in the year 1999. A lot of explorers wanted to do it, like Richard Branson, Steve Fossett. There were about 10 teams. And I tried twice with failures and succeeded on the third attempt. And what I really learned is the fact that each time you fail, you have to change a lot of things before trying again. This is why I succeeded. I changed the shape of the balloon, the type of fuel, the strategy, the routing, the crew. Each time I progressed, and my competitors never changed anything between two failures, and they continued to fail repetitively for exactly the same reason. So that was my main learning. And the second learning, of course, is that with a balloon, I took off with 3.7 tons of liquid propane and landed with 40 kilos.
Wow.
And at this moment, you understand that it's wrong to say the sky is the limit. The sky is not the limit. The fuel is the limit. And this is actually when I thought, okay, to continue flying and do better than the balloon flight, I have to get rid of the fuel. And that was the dream of Solar Impulse.
Wow. This is so interesting. I have to rewind a little. You talked to me about your grandfather. Your grandfather was a balloonist himself, but your father was an undersea explorer. Why did you take to the sky and not to the sea?
My father did the ultimate dive. I could not do better, He made the first dive ever to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, 11 kilometers down. So there was nothing left to do. And this is why I went back to the sky, where there were so many new things to do that my grandfather could not have done. If you want to fly around the world nonstop in a balloon, you need the GPS. You need the weather forecast, everything that was not existing in 1931.
That's amazing. It seems like this runs in the generation. So solar impulse to climate impulse. What's the journey been like? Why climate impulse?
Solar Impulse was a project aiming at showing what renewable energies and clean technologies can achieve in terms of so-called impossible feats. But it was not a way to promote aviation. It was a way to promote clean technologies and energy efficiency and solar power, because the plane itself was 72-meter wingspan. That's like an Airbus 340. It's bigger than the jumbo jet.
Wow.
The weight was the one of a family car, 2,300 kilos. And we're flying at 25 knots, so 45 kilometers per hour, with the power of a scooter. And just one pilot on board, 0 passengers. And we took 16 stopovers to go around the world. So, of course, it was zero emission. Of course, it was really innovative. Of course, it was spectacular. Everybody followed it. But it was not a way to show what aviation would become. It was a way to show what solar energy could achieve. So the next project, of course, has to be the ultimate flight. That means non-stop around the world with zero emissions. So how do you do that? You cannot do it with batteries because you need too many batteries. Solar energy, well, we've done it and we've seen that it works, but it's very slow. You cannot transport anybody with you. So the only way to do is hydrogen, liquid hydrogen. And the plane is today under construction. It's a 3 fuselage plane. The 2 big fuselage will carry the liquid hydrogen tanks. The small fuselage in the middle will carry Rafael Dinelli and me. Rafael is my partner in this project. He is the one in charge of the construction of the plane with his company that is called 49 South. And we will fly together. It should be a 9-day flight. And there you have a real airplane flying 180 kilometers per hour that can handle the turbulence, that can, if we don't go around the world for some of the flights and we just fly a couple of hours, we can take 4 to 5 people on board. So it starts to be really an airplane that can promote the aviation of the future and not only the energy of the future.
Wow, this is so interesting. I want to focus on the 2 tanks you mentioned with liquid hydrogen. My understanding is liquid hydrogen needs to be stored at minus 253 degrees Celsius. How do you intend to accomplish that, keeping hydrogen in liquid form and cooled up?
It has to be passive insulation. Otherwise, it's far too much energy needed in the air. So basically, what do? You take renewable electricity, solar, wind, hydroelectricity, for example. You run the electricity through the water, and that produces hydrogen and oxygen. You keep the hydrogen, you liquefy it at minus 253 degrees, so very close to the absolute zero, where the molecules almost don't move anymore. And then you fill up the tank that has to be insulated enough to keep the hydrogen liquid for 9 days. Of course, there is always a little bit of hydrogen that is evaporating because the insulation cannot be 100%. But this evaporation, that is called the boil-off, goes through the fuel cell, which brings the hydrogen with the ambient air into water and electricity again. And this electricity goes to the electric motor.
Interesting. So you're saying even the hydrogen that is escaping is going through the fuel cell and generating electricity. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if we have a good calculation of the insulation and the evaporation, we will use exactly what is needed to run the engine of the plane.
Wow. Just trying to understand this better. You mentioned that you're carrying the hydrogen for the full 9 days. That means no refueling stops at all?
Absolutely. No stop, no refueling. And you know what is interesting? To show you the order of magnitude for the future, we have a wingspan of 34 meters, which is the same than an Airbus 320. And we carry hydrogen for 2 people for 9 days. If you put the same amount of hydrogen in an Airbus 320 with 150 people, you can fly a medium-haul flight of 4 hours.
How's that?
You see, yes. So you see that it is not something that is completely crazy and that is just experimental to make a record. No, it is something that can be implemented into commercial aviation. And our goal is not just to bring a message. Our goal is really to make a revolution in air transport.
This is fantastic. I love the promise around this. Now, you have done this before with hydrogen as an energy carrier. If I'm not wrong, you actually set the record for the most miles driven on a hydrogen car without refueling, I believe in 2019. Any lessons from that you're applying to this flight as well?
Well, with a car, that was a Hyundai Nexo. And it was interesting because it was not an experimental car. It was a car that you can buy on the market. So everybody can make a record with a Hyundai Nexo if he wants. I drove almost 800 kilometers with 1 tank of hydrogen. But the hydrogen is compressed hydrogen, is gaseous, it's not liquid. So it has nothing to do with what we want to do with aviation. But when we speak about hydrogen, it's interesting to see which indication is the best. If you have a car that is a light car, or a light truck, it's better to put batteries than to put a hydrogen system. Why that? Because with a battery, you lose no electricity. If you go through the entire hydrogen loop, you lose about 55% of it. So you see that it's better to have batteries, but if you are in a heavy transport mode, a heavy truck, a train, a boat, a plane, it's too heavy to take batteries because you would spend too much energy just to carry the batteries. And ecologically speaking, it doesn't make sense to make so big batteries. So in this case, it's better to use hydrogen.
So I want to go back to your earlier point, which is the same amount of hydrogen that you are using for your round the world flight can power an A320 for up to 4 hours. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a rough calculation that we did.
So is your goal then to inspire commercial aviation to change their ways and go towards a cleaner fuel like hydrogen?
Absolutely, yes. But we're also very much aware that it will take time because you need to have an airplane with hydrogen transporting passengers. This is what Airbus wants to do by 2035. But then you need to change all the fleet. You need to change the airport. You need to have an industry that will provide hydrogen to all the airports. So it will not be done overnight. And it's clear that the way aviation is run today is that you have airplanes that are built for 30 years operations, 18 hours a day. So before you change airplanes, you need maybe to wait 30 years after 2035. You see, so it won't happen
It's already
very, very fast.
2065. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So what are we going to do meanwhile? Before we have hydrogen available for all the airplanes, we'll probably have the SAF, sustainable aviation fuels, knowing that it's probably an intermediate solution. Because with SAF, you are not as neutral as you think. What do you do with SAF? You collect CO2. You collect waste, plastic, cooking oil, residue from farms or farming or agriculture, whatever. You have this CO2 in your hands. And then what do? You turn it into a fuel, and the CO2 goes back in the atmosphere. But this CO2, you could also sequestrate it and put it on the ground. So you are maybe neutral, but in a situation where you could be very well carbon negative. So this is why I don't believe that the SAF will be the magical solution. No. If you really want to be carbon free, you use renewable electricity to produce green hydrogen. You put it through fuel cells. You activate electric motors that are 95 or 97% efficient, and you have a real decarbonized aviation. But of course, you need to have people that will believe in it. Today, you have a lot of people who write everywhere, it will never happen, it's impossible, you cannot decarbonize aviation, you have to ban aviation, prevent the people from flying. Well, I don't think this is practical. And even if some activists obtain it in Europe, it will change nothing in the world because no other continent is going to stop flying. And if Europe flies less, Africa and Asia will fly more. So I think the goal really today is to give a message that we have to decarbonize aviation, and we have to start now by working on showing how we can do it. That's the role of Climate Impulse. Then building hydrogen airplanes. That's the role of Airbus. And then it will be all the industry that will have to produce liquid hydrogen and deliver it on airports.
This is an important point. Now, I think you're being very smart about not having any refueling stop and building the aircraft which can fly for 9 days, on just one load of hydrogen. But this is an important challenge you mentioned, where airports, so let's say I'm flying from a short haul, let's say Bristol to Rotterdam. Both airports, I think, are looking at supporting hydrogen. The pilot needs to not only be able to fuel up with hydrogen on both ends, both airports need to build hydrogen storage facilities, hydrogen transportation infrastructure. All of that has to be in place. And I heard a very interesting statistic that if London Heathrow is to build a hydrogen terminal to supply all the flights out of Heathrow, it needs to build a storage facility as large as Terminal 2 in Heathrow. Now, that's not very feasible for very large airports, is it? How do we get around this infrastructure problem?
Well, there was the same question when people were traveling by horse, and there was the idea of having cars and gas stations. And so many people said, no way to go with cars. It's so much easier to give grass or hay to the horses at every hotel. Why do we need the cars? Impossible to put all these gas stations. And in a few years, there were gas stations everywhere and people were traveling by car. It was exactly the same thing 20 years ago or 30 years ago with the beginning of the mobile phone industry. How many people believed with $10,000 mobile phones big as a suitcase that everybody could have a little smartphone in his pocket 30 years later? People thought, no, it's a niche industry. There will never be enough antennas everywhere. And now we don't only have antennas everywhere, but we even get the satellite signal. And now everybody has smartphones instead of landlines. So you see, it's very, very dangerous to say it will never happen because we look completely stupid afterward. And I think for the hydrogen industry, it has to be included into a change of mindset in which we will be efficient enough in so many other sectors that we will have enough energy to have electric cars, to have hydrogen planes, to have green steel, to have fertilizers using green hydrogen, because the industry also needs hydrogen. But today, what is the mindset? Always produce more to be able to waste more. And you know that 3/4 of the energy produced in the world today is wasted, either by wrong behaviors or old, outdated, and inefficient technologies. I give you an example. If in France, you would have LED lamps everywhere, also in the public lighting, instead of only half of France with LED, you would save enough electricity for 7 million electric cars every day.
Wow.
So that's the reality. You know, we waste so much energy and resources that of course we think, we cannot have more energy to produce hydrogen. But if you have well-insulated buildings, heat pumps, LED lamps, energy efficiency everywhere, stop to waste the food that also needs fertilizers and energy for the harvest and the culture and the transportation and distribution. If you have modern industrial processes, well, you save 3/4 of the energy. And these 3/4, you can use them for something clever to decarbonize what is the most difficult to decarbonize. That means transport and aviation especially.
This is so interesting. You mentioned earlier, still talking about adoption, that SAF or sustainable aviation fuels is an interim framework. Yet we see large industry bodies like IATA, focusing on sustainable aviation fuels. Large companies like Boeing have actually invested significantly in building up SAF infrastructure around the world as well. Is your goal then with your Climate Impulse flight to change the thinking around the industry and prioritize hydrogen instead of SAF?
I'm not fighting against SAF, and I'm not fighting against flights around the world with stopovers. I'm just advertising for the ultimate and best way to do. The ultimate flight is non-stop around the world. The ultimate fuel is zero carbon. But zero carbon, that means you are not even in the cycle of carbon. It's not a question of carbon neutrality. You're outside of carbon. You have solar or wind or hydroelectric electricity to produce clean hydrogen that goes in a clean way through a fuel cell and an electric motor. So you have no combustion. With the SAF, you are, as I said before, you believe that you are neutral, but you could be carbon negative with the same way because you are putting back in the atmosphere the CO2 that you had in your hands. So instead of sequestrating it, you put it back in circulation. And you have a combustion, which means that you have NOx, you have microparticles, you have pollution. So I'm not against SAF, but I believe that SAF will have a period from, let's say, in 5 years' time until in 30 years' time. That will be 25 years for SAF. And meanwhile, hydrogen aviation will develop, and hydrogen aviation will be the ultimate perfection to fly.
So it is true zero that you're focusing on, and not just net zero. And you're showcasing how true zero can be a way forward.
SAF is not net zero, huh? SAF is putting back in the atmosphere the CO2 you have captured. So I know it's better than to extract new oil from the ground, but nevertheless, if you capture CO2 and you sequestrate it, then you are doing good. If you put it back in the atmosphere, you're putting CO2 in the atmosphere wherever it comes from.
Right. I remember when you did the Solar Impulse flight, your Solar Impulse Foundation identified over 1,000 profitable solutions for protecting the environment. Yes. How do you see these solutions being applied specifically in aviation? And is that the goal with Climate Impulse as well?
It is true that we identified solutions. We are now at 1,780 when I'm speaking now.
Wow.
And these are solutions that are very practical, concrete solutions that exist today. They are not vague ideas for the future. They exist today. They protect the environment, and they are economically profitable, which is very important because you need to include the industry, the economy, and the finance in the climate transition. And if it is expensive, nobody will do it, even in the public. But if it's profitable, you will do it. And what is the most profitable today? It's efficiency. Efficiency is when you consume less and you can achieve more. So your cost is lower. Your margin profit is higher. So I give you some examples for aviation, some examples examples of solutions that we have labeled. It's, for example, APU off. When an airplane is on the tarmac or the apron, it still has the auxiliary power unit turning with kerosene to do what? The light inside the plane and the air conditioning. You can plug the plane at the airport to get electricity feed in, and you don't need your APU. That's one system. You have another system that is made out of electric tractors to bring the plane to the threshold instead of taxiing with its own engine. Now you have another one that I love very much. It's the constant descent approach. Instead of incremental approach where you end up gear down, flaps down, full power to keep 250 knots, lot of drag, lot of noise, lot of pollution, you come like the space shuttle. You glide down. And if you glide down, you almost don't need your engine. I don't know for an Airbus, but on a jumbo jet, you save 1 ton of kerosene for every landing. Can you imagine? You are much more efficient. You save money, and you make less noise, and you make less pollution.
And you save fuel.
But you know the limit? You know the limit of this? It's the air traffic controllers. Many of them don't want to change their way of working because it needs a new procedure. You have the open sky also, where you have much more direct routes. You have opposition of the countries, because if you go over 3 countries, you pay 3 times. And if you go directly, maybe you have only 2 countries. So the third one says, no, we also want some money. We want to be overflown. So it's very difficult to make negotiations between all the countries for that. So basically, you have administration problems, diplomatic problems that also keep the airplanes polluting, where they could be much more efficient. And of course, you have also special softwares that exist today that help the pilot to optimize his flight in terms of tailwind, of headwind, in terms of trajectory, in order to save fuel. And we have several of these softwares that are labeled by my foundation and used on airplanes. Air France, I think, was one of the first to use one of these softwares.
Wow, this is already very exciting. And I'm thinking, okay, what all applications can there be? One of the interesting things is that you have scheduled this flight for 2028. That's still in 4 years from now. What are some of the key milestones you're looking to achieve between now and then? And what about setbacks based on your past experience? How do you intend to overcome those?
We have not yet had some setbacks in this project, which means
That's
that
great.
they will come. No, it means they are coming because you cannot avoid having setbacks in a completely experimental project that nobody has ever tried. So there's no benchmark. Nobody can help you. And this is why we need very strong partners, very strong team in order to do our best each time. And if we have a setback, to fall on our feet again and continue. So before announcing the project, I needed to secure the best partners. And we started with ScienceCo. ScienceCo is the spin-off of Solvay, who supported my grandfather in 1931, who supported my Solar Impulse project as early as 2003. And now they were the first main partner for Climate Impulse. And they produce carbon fiber, special membranes for fuel cells, insulation for the fuel tank, composite materials. So very, very strong partner. We also secured the partnership of OCP. OCP is the phosphate industry in Morocco, who is now making a conversion to hydrogen. And this is very interesting to work with an industry. We work with a university, Mohammed VI Polytechnic, in order to include educational programs, because we need our project to be useful to the world. And Morocco, is the opening door to the global south. So we're working a lot to help as many countries as possible to have access to this hydrogen industry. Of course, Breitling. Breitling supported me since 1992. Even when I crossed the Atlantic in a balloon in 1992, Breitling was my partner. So they are supporting. And plus, now technical companies who are helping us a lot. Airbus, who made the feasibility study. Airbus helped us with the aerodynamic design of the plane. Daher, aviation, is working on the mobile pieces like the flaps and the ailerons. Ariane Group is helping us with hydrogen because they are used to have hydrogen engines for their rockets. So you see, I think we are well organized. Now, of course, we'll need additional partners to finish the project. And we need now to build. The plane is under construction. The molds for the wings have just arrived. The fuselage for the cockpit is already molded. We are now installing the instruments and all the life on board. And by 2026, we should have the plane built, if everything goes well, to make the first test flights. And 2028, if everything goes well, I hate to tempt fate. So I always say, if everything goes right, we should be ready to make the attempt of flying around the world nonstop, zero emissions.
Wow. This is so exciting. Where will we take off from? And do you already have the route that you will take? Will it follow a similar route as Solar Impulse?
It will be more to the south. We will fly lower, about 10,000 feet. And we don't know yet where we come from, because several countries are interested to be the host country for the departure and the arrival. So we're discussing with them which one wants to be the partner for that.
It's so interesting, all of this. Tell me, how do you deal with range anxiety, Bertrand? It's a term known to electric vehicle drivers. You said in Solar, was it Solar Impulse or was it the balloon? Yeah, balloon. You landed with 40 liters of fuel left, and now with hydrogen, you're going to fuel it up again. How do you deal with range anxiety?
You know what really makes me afraid? It's to live in a world that burns 1 million tons of oil every hour. This frightens me. What frightens me is to have a world of pollution, inefficiency, waste of natural resources, waste of energy, social inequalities, poverty, biodiversity issues. Well, this frightens me. But to fly in a solar-powered airplane, to fly in a hydrogen airplane, No, this is for me a dream. It's not a fear.
Wow. Wow. I love it. I love the comeback there around anxiety. You have worked with various partners. You mentioned everyone from Airbus to Breitling on this project. How crucial are these collaborations in pushing the boundaries? For example, will you be sharing your learnings of operating a hydrogen flight with Airbus, who is running a program around hydrogen flight for the future? How do you foster innovation across these different organizations that you work with?
For example, with ScienceCo, there are a lot of researchers who are working specifically for our needs. They work on the best carbon fibers for the fuselage. They work on the best fuel tank to keep the hydrogen liquid at minus 253. They work on the best membranes to increase the efficiency of the fuel cells. They work on the batteries. So they are really making a lot of research to have our airplane more efficient and more performant. Airbus has given us a lot of help, and I hope we can give them back a lot of learnings, because we're a little bit like a test bench, a forerunner. We are demonstrating today that the hydrogen airplane is absolutely possible, and this is important for them, because they need also to convince the world of aviation that they are not only dreamers, but doers. And by having a collaboration like this, I hope we can be useful to Airbus, to Daher, to Ariane Group, but we can, and of course, ScienceCo, but I hope that we can be useful to the world and make the hydrogen industry desirable.
It's very, very interesting. Now, the one question that often we discuss in the industry is, if there's only going to be limited green hydrogen and lots of resources going towards it, why should aviation be entitled to green hydrogen as opposed to other sectors? How do we address that?
You need to give hydrogen also to other sectors. Absolutely. You need to give it to the steel industry, because you can make green steel, zero carbon steel with hydrogen. It's exactly the same for the fertilizers industry. You need hydrogen for the fertilizers in order to make them much greener. And then you need it for aviation or heavy trucks or boats. But don't make the mistake to give hydrogen to light cars, because this is useless. It's much better with batteries. Don't make the mistake to heat the houses with hydrogen. You have some people who say we're going to put hydrogen in pipelines and bring it to the houses exactly like natural gas for heating. This is completely stupid, because you are much more efficient with heat pumps. So use the electricity directly at the heat pump instead of using electricity to go for producing hydrogen that will come back and go to the heating system. That makes absolutely no sense. So there will be, in the beginning, not enough hydrogen for all the people who really need it. And this is why we have to increase at the same time the offer and the demand. And the best way for this is to have the price going down. And you need to reach the critical mass as soon as possible. Don't forget that 25 years ago, the solar-powered electricity, photovoltaic, was 40 times more expensive, 40 times, 40 times more expensive than it is today. And now, it is the cheapest energy that you can get in the world. So you just need the subsidies, the support, the incentives in the beginning to reach the quantity of production and the quantity of demand where the price falls down. We have not yet reached this price with hydrogen, and we need to reach it as soon as possible.
Fair enough. I fully agree. And we've seen this same development in wind as well as solar as well. And thank you for highlighting some of those statistics.
Exactly.
Now, Bertrand, you are a psychiatrist and an explorer. Some people say that that's crazy, but you're a psychiatrist. So crazy, I think, has a different meaning to it. You have a unique perspective on the human aspect of these groundbreaking flights. How do you approach the mental challenges of these missions for both yourself, and now you will have a co-pilot as well?
Well, just for these missions, I use a lot of hypnosis techniques. With hypnosis, you can visualize in advance the potential problems and the very quiet and safe way to solve the problem in order to avoid panicking. This is very important. If suddenly you have an emergency and you panic, you're dead. But if you have anticipated in advance how quiet you will be to solve the problem, you will solve it very well. So that's one way to get prepared. The other one is to manage your sleep patterns. With Solar Impulse, I was sleeping 20 minutes and then I had to wake up to control the plane and then sleep 20 minutes again. Hypnosis was really important for that. And then I would say, as a more general understanding of the situation, we have to understand that human beings resist to get out of their comfort zone. They want to keep their habits, their routine, the status quo, the habits. And this makes human beings not performant and not creative at all, because you just reproduce what you have learned to do. So there is no innovation and disruption. But if you go into the unknown, if you have ruptures, and a crisis, an adventure, at this moment you are obliged to go into the question marks and the doubts, and this will stimulate your creativity, will stimulate your performance, because you will need to do things well. If you don't do it well, you fail, you fall, you die, or whatever. So you need to be absolutely aware of everything, and you are obliged to do well. And this is what I noticed each time I was in an adventure. In the beginning, it was for me a big question mark. How was it possible that I felt so good in a balloon in the middle of the Atlantic or the Pacific, thousands of kilometers from any potential rescue? I felt better than in any other moment of my life, And I thought, I'm crazy or what? And finally, I understood that when you are out of all your references, all your benchmarks, you're obliged to go and get the resources inside of you. And you just go inside of you and you get all the confidence, the performance, the concentration, the good reaction, the awareness. You become conscious that you are alive in your body at that special moment in this special place. And it gives you so much more performance. It's unbelievable. And this is why I love adventure. I always say that adventure is a crisis that you accept, and crisis is an adventure that you refuse. And I believe that we have to understand that in every moment of our life. When we have a crisis, we can say, okay, I accept it because I will learn new tools, new skills. I will be better after the crisis than before, and then it becomes an adventure.
Wow, this is so inspiring already. Looking beyond climate impulse, what is your vision for the future of sustainable aviation in the next 20, 30 years? What changes do you hope to see in the industry and also public perception of air travel?
First, I would like to put the context, the frame. Aviation is emitting 3% of the CO2 emissions of the world. The food waste is emitting 6%. The textile industry is emitting 7%. Ground transport is about 30%. This means that we have to stop to use aviation as a scapegoat. Aviation has to decarbonize, but everything else also. And there are low-hanging fruits that we have to do before, because it will be easier. It's much easier to have electric vehicles on the roads, to have well-insulated buildings, to have LED lamps, heat pumps. All this is much easier than to decarbonize aviation. But nevertheless, we have to decarbonize aviation, of course. So we have to go progressively. We need to make airplanes lighter, to have less fuel consumption. This is what Airbus is doing with the 320neo. It's a fantastic example. And I think the other constructors have to follow that example. Now you need direct routes, constant descent approach, you need all this. And you need also something else. I know it's controversial, but I don't care. It's what I deeply believe. Aviation is sometimes far too cheap. And you have a lot of people who fly, not because they want to go somewhere, but because it is cheap. They saw an advertising, 29 euros to fly from Paris to Spain. They don't really thought of going to Spain, but they think for 29 euros, let's go. And you keep people flying with a very, very low margin of profit because the airlines don't earn a lot. And I think it's completely wrong. We need to have less people flying, but paying more money for the ticket. The ticket should include the CO2 part of it in order to really compensate the emissions in the correct way. And then the profit for the airlines would be bigger. They would make more profit, but less revenue. And we all know that you can make more profit with less revenue. It means that you spend less, that you sell more quality, and that your margin of profit is higher. And I think this is the way to go for aviation. And this will also give enough money to change progressively to go for SAF in the beginning and hydrogen at the end.
What about all those people in the global south who might be flying for the first time? I hear you around, cheap 10 euro, 20 euro tickets to Spain or to Ibiza. But what about, people in India or Indonesia who are flying for the first time in their lives?
Well, it depends if they need to fly. And in this case, it's important that they have access to flying. But they don't need, I would say, we are not all obliged to fly everywhere all the time. When I was a child, I spent 2 years in Florida, 1968 to 1970. And I would have loved to go back there in the years after I came back to Switzerland. I was dreaming of going back to Florida when I spent my childhood. And I had to wait for 20 years before I could afford the ticket to go there. And it was normal. Aviation was expensive. And I had to wait until I could save money in order to go there. Okay, I never complained about that. And now you go to Florida for $300. I think there is a distortion of the situation there. I don't think it's healthy for the world that everybody can fly for so cheap. And they even forget the magic of flying, Mm-hmm. When you are in the low cost, you even complain if you have 5 minutes delay, and you forget that flying is a miracle. It took thousands of years until we could have flying available for all.
I definitely hear you on that. Florida is a good place to close this interview. I remember when you were a kid and you spent time in Florida, you used to go to Cape Canaveral to watch these rockets take off. How has that period inspired you to what you're doing now?
What inspired me was not only to see 6 Apollo liftoff. What inspired me was to meet all the astronauts of the early American space program. The guys that are in the film and the book, The Right Stuff. All these first astronauts that I was lucky enough to meet, they explained me what they were doing, why they were doing it. And they were normal people, but normal people with a huge ambition of doing something that had never been done before. And that was for me an example. And I owe them a lot of what I've done later. Now, of course, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepped foot on the moon, then it was at the same time a fantastic moment, and for me quite depressing, because I thought everything has been done. What's left for me? I was 11 years old and I thought my life was over. And this is when I started to have a compass in my heart with a needle that was not showing the north, it was showing the unknown. Everything that had not been done. So each time there was something new, I went for it. I started to fly hang gliders with one of the first hang gliders in Switzerland when I was 16 years old in 1974. And I flew on the first microlight airplane that was brought to Switzerland 4 years later, or 5 years later. And then I was invited to cross the Atlantic in a balloon when I was not a balloonist. And I said, okay, I go for it. I always say yes. I think the first An only thing that I never tried is drugs, because I don't think there is any benefit in drugs. But beside that, I tried, I think, almost everything. And when I liked it, I continued. When I did not like it, I stopped. And finally, it brought me to the Breitling Orbiter flight around the world, to Solar Impulse, now with Climate Impulse. I think life is like this. Life is a series of opportunities where you can say yes or no. And if you are an explorer, you say yes. And if you are not an explorer, you are tempted to say no because you want to stay in the routine and everything you know. But then you miss most of what life can bring you.
So, in that words, then aren't we all explorers? Shouldn't we all be aiming to be exploring in our lives every day,
We
like you
should,
are?
we should all be explorers for every decision we take in our life. Learning a new language, having the job we want, getting married, or sometimes to take the decision to divorce, to have children or not. You have decisions to take. And it's important to be the actors of our future instead of being the victims of our past. But a lot of people are not explorers. They have learned to avoid the doubt and the unknown and the question marks. And this is a pity because they remain in their routine and they miss everything else.
Wow, this is so inspiring, Bertrand. Thank you very much. The conversation has been way beyond just your flights, and I'm going to be peeled to the news of what's happening with Climate Impulse, how you're progressing, and if we can be of any help, please let us know. But there's a final part to this interview, which is called the rapid fire round, in which we get to know you a bit more personally. So I'll ask you simple questions like, what's your favorite book?
There was a favorite book in every period of my life, so there is not just one. I remember the one that I was reading when I started to fly with hang gliders. That was Jonathan Livingstone Seagull.
Yeah.
That changed my mindset about flying. But then in every other part of my life, there was another important book.
Amazing. Love it. What's your favorite airline, Bertrand?
Air France.
Okay. Favorite airport?
Air France has done so much progress. They have a fantastic service now, and they are really at the top quality, top level.
Wow. I'm sure Ben Smith would love that as well. What's your favorite airport?
Airport. There are a lot of airports that are very well run, that are perfect, but what I like is a little bit the exotic airports, when I arrive and I don't know the country and I discover something, arriving in Myanmar, that's incredible. Arriving in La Paz, in Bolivia,
wow,
where you land at 4,000 meters altitude, in rare air, and the pilot has the oxygen mask in case of depressurization. This is exciting.
Wow, amazing. What's your favorite movie?
I loved the movie The Butterfly Effect, L'effet papillon.
Yeah.
Because it shows really the consequence of what you decide. And sometimes you think, wow, if I could have decided something else, my life would be different. And this film shows it so well. I love it.
Fantastic. It's an inspiring movie indeed. Favorite city, Bertrand?
I love the cities in Myanmar. Bagan, Inle, the Mandalay. It's so beautiful with the peaceful people and spiritual temples. And I think it is such a pity that they have now a civil war and a regime that is not giving the best image of this fantastic country.
I hear you. What is something you still want to do? It seems like you've done a lot of cool things.
There is one thing that I don't know how to learn. It's to sing correctly, because I sing completely wrong. I love to sing, But when I sing at home, my children shout, "Daddy, close the door or shut up." So this is really something I still want to learn before I die.
Okay. How old are your kids?
They are 30, 32, 34.
And are any of them following in your footsteps being adventurers?
Not adventurers, but pioneers. Pioneers
Okay.
in their own right. They love to go into new things, take decisions, explore, be curious. They want to understand before believing something.
I hear you. What is the best advice you received?
The only way to be certain to fail is to give up. And you know who told me that? It's Dick Rutan. Dick
Wow.
Rutan, who flew with Voyager around the world non-stop, but with gasoline. And before my flight with Breitling Orbiter 3, he told me, "Bertrand, you should always remember the only way to fail is to give up."
Wow.
And there was a moment where there was theoretically not enough propane fuel to finish the flight. Reasonably, we should have landed. But I remember this piece of advice and I said, "No way, I'm not quitting. Let's go for it." And we started to cross the Atlantic where there was not enough fuel to finish the flight. And there was the miracle to hit a jet stream.
Oh, wow.
That was 232 kilometers per hour and took the balloon like a rocket across the Atlantic and across Africa to Egypt. And we could succeed.
Wow. Congratulations on not giving up. The world is watching. Thank you, Bertrand.
With pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air. Aviation is one of the hardest to decarbonize industries, yet there are multiple paths to get to net zero. Awareness is key to a green future. So please give us your support to help our sustainable aviation insights reach a wider audience. You can do this by sharing this episode on your network, on LinkedIn, Twitter, or even WhatsApp. Or perhaps you might consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this episode. You can start a conversation with us by writing to us at podcast@simpliflying, that's simply with an i.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website green.simpliflying.com and join the movement. Sustainability in the Air is an original podcast by Simpliflying. The show is produced by Juraj Toth in Slovakia. Dirk Singer is our Director of Sustainability, who leads research for each interviewee out of Greenwich, UK. Shubhadeep Pal is our Supervising Editor based out of Mumbai and Singapore. The articles are written by Ayushi Badola in Dehradun in India and Mira Hull in Montreal, Quebec. Creative design is led by Lihia Esteve in Montreal. Baiba Drimain is the project director for the show based out of Valencia, Spain. Special thanks to Wendy Sim in Singapore. And I'm Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simpliflying and your host. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.